thing that has people freaked out right now is, at least from the outside, the Trump administration is saying we're okay with a little bit of volatility. There's been so much fundamentally positive news, and it's just been buried sort of in the background. It's been suppressed because in the short term, this overhang of the economic uncertainty is weighing on the markets. I think if that is released, we're at new all-time highs quickly, and we're on our way to where I think we'll be at the end of the year, which is Bitcoin 200,000.
The markets are on edge, and Matt Hougan believes we're at a pivotal moment. Will the government blink first, flooding the economy with fresh stimulus? Or are we about to enter a painful but necessary reset that shakes the markets to their core? For Bitcoin, the stakes couldn't be higher. If relief comes, Hougan sees Bitcoin soaring past $200,000 by year-end. But if policymakers hold the line, we could be in for a frustrating sideways grind. This isn't just another crypto forecast. This is a battle between economic reality and political will. Will Bitcoin's insatiable demand finally overpower the suppressed bullish news? Or are we in for more uncertainty? Stick around as we break down Matt Hougan's insights, the Fed's next move, and why the coming weeks could define the future of crypto. Before we get started, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's dive in.
Yeah, obviously the big story this week is the prospect for a recession, or to be more precise, how the government is going to respond to the prospect of a recession or a weakening economy. So everyone, including me, is parsing the words of whatever government secretary or executive is on TV talking about what's going on. I love it when we can focus specifically on crypto, and I think the story there is very strong. But right now, it's the economy, stupid, and that's what people are paying attention to.
Well, let's talk about what people are saying on TV. We had Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent join NBC News' Meet the Press on Sunday, and he did not rule out the possibility of a recession. So really backing up what you're saying, everyone is wondering if we are heading towards a recession. And Matt, I have to say, I've been talking to economists and analysts on the show for a really long time, and they've all been calling for a recession. And this has been happening far before this administration has taken office. Talk to me about the possibility of a recession actually happening and what that means and what that actually looks like. Because I hear people talking about recession. I don't think they actually know what that looks like practically.
That's right. I mean, I've said before that I think the government has outlawed recessions. I think what's interesting about this particular moment, because you're right, we've been crying recession for 10 years and it's never arrived. The reason it's never arrived is every time there's a little wrinkle in the economy, the government steps in with stimulus, with reduced rates, with other ways of monetary support. We've sort of become allergic to any economic pullback, which is a natural part of the economic cycle. I think the thing that has people freaked out right now is, at least from the outside, the Trump administration is saying we're okay with a little bit of volatility. And so that monetary stimulus may not arrive in the way that it has since 2008. My core belief is that it will arrive. My core belief is that the government will blink, that we really are allergic to these economic pullbacks, that we're not set up anymore to withstand that kind of volatility. So I expect maybe even this week to see the government start to blink, maybe at Jerome Powell's press conference later in the week. But if they don't blink, if we're really going to sort of embrace this pullback, this cleansing pullback, then that'll be a challenge for the equity markets and a challenge short term for the crypto markets. I think we'll be okay long term, but I think that's the game that's being played right now.
Let's talk about the two different scenarios. So we have the Fed meeting on Wednesday. Everyone's going to be watching, like you said, for cues on the central bank's readiness to deploy stimulus. If it seems like stimulus is coming to save us from a recession, what do crypto markets look like? I know in the past, crypto markets have reacted nicely to stimulus and cheaper money. What are you expecting to happen?
Yeah, more than nicely is what I'm expecting to happen. The thing that's happened in crypto over the last, let's say, 6 weeks is there has been so much fundamentally positive news. And it's just been buried sort of in the background. We've caused ourselves to ignore it. There's the strategic Bitcoin reserve. There's the SEC pulling back on essentially every lawsuit. There's progress on stablecoin legislation. There's talk of market structure legislation. There was the White House crypto summit. these are game-changing positive developments that should put Bitcoin trading at $150,000 or $200,000 today. It's been suppressed because in the short term, this overhang of the economic uncertainty is weighing on the markets. I think if that is released, we're at new all-time highs quickly, and we're on our way to where I think we'll be at the end of the year, which is Bitcoin 200,000. So I think there's been this sort of suppression of really good news. If that suppression is removed, I think it's a coiled spring. So in that scenario, I think we do exceptionally well.
Is there anything else that needs to happen to get us to Bitcoin at 200K by the end of the year?
I don't think so. You have these three horsemen of insatiable demand for Bitcoin. You have the ETFs, which I continue to think will have strong net flows this year. You have companies. We saw MicroStrategy buying more Bitcoin. I think the number of companies buying Bitcoin is going to triple this year. I think the game theory is on. It's slower than people maybe want in this impatient crypto world, but I think countries around the world are going to be buying Bitcoin. So there is structurally more demand than supply in Bitcoin. I think all we need is to release this sort of economic gloom that's hanging over us. If we do that, I think it's straight to the races.
Okay, now if we get to Wednesday's meeting and it looks like it's still going to be rocky roads ahead, we're not going to see much relief from the government here in the United States, what happens?
Yeah, if it's sort of the tough parent, stiff upper lip thing. I think it's going to be more market uncertainty. You could see Bitcoin go back to, 72,000 to its previous all-time highs. I don't think there's downside really below that. I think there's a great deal of support right there. In the long term, this good news is not going to remain suppressed. In the long term, the good news will make its way into the market and we will eventually get to where we're going. But yeah, if government officials hold the line that they're okay with economic volatility, they're okay with a short-term significant pullback in the economy, that they're not going to come to the rescue with at least more relaxed monetary or fiscal policies, then I think, volatility, we're going to chop sideways. We're all going to be frustrated. And that's the game that we're playing. But again, for long-term investors, I'm not sure it matters. Bitcoin is going to get there eventually. Crypto assets more broadly are going to get there eventually. But whether it's like a very exciting spring or a very frustrating spring could depend on what's said, later this week.
All right, so your bull case is 200K by the end of the year. You've kind of hinted at what your bear case is, but do you have a number? Where do you see us going in terms of Bitcoin price if the latter happens?
In the negative scenario? Yeah. Look, I think we could chop sideways back to all-time highs. I think previous all-time highs when we were at like 72. We saw us trade there from about March through November. I think there's a reasonable amount of support there. I'd be surprised if we went much lower than that, but who knows? It depends on how stiff the government is in refusing to respond to this economic uncertainty. But again, I go back to this core point, which there's this structural mismatch between demand and supply. The Bitcoin network is only producing 165,000 Bitcoin per year. Last year, the ETFs bought 500,000. Even if they buy half of that this year, that's more than the new demand. So there is this structural imbalance that I think puts a floor on Bitcoin that's higher than many people sort of expect. I think institutions are still moving in, governments are moving in, corporations are moving in. So there is some space to the downside, but I'd be very surprised. And as a long-term investor, very excited if we had the opportunity to buy below that, because long-term, I think the story is in. There's just too much demand coming into the market. The asset is too small.
So it really is a buy the dip case then, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, dip and rip, I think, is the story here. If we get negative news, I think it's a pullback, but I think there's so much good news that's been sort of stored as dried powder that eventually that will be released. Eventually, it can't be held down forever, right? We have to step back and remember that a year ago, we had Gary Gensler in a very challenging environment. And today we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve and probably market structure regulation. I don't think the market is priced in at all how different those two scenarios are. So yes, if it pulls back, I think it's dip and rip. And eventually we will get to where we're going. Just whether it'll be a frustrating spring or an exciting spring is probably the question in the market right now.